People can join in here is that, do you think therefore that there is a need to to try and overcome the limitations of the historical archive, and to recover the small and neglected voices of history, as you have done by your use of language, a pastiche, a patchwork quilt of language, dialects, pidgin, and use them to help the reader not only to read about the past, but to help him inhabit the past, as it were.
Uh, that, that's a very difficult question because, as Mukul says, it's true that, it's only when you have some sort of reliable source that you can actually enter into that empathy. The problem really is that for us, writing about India's past, we just don't have those sources. That's just the case. If you consider that from 1760 to 1914, literally millions of Indians fought as sepoys for the British Indian Army, and in this entire period, there is not a single reliably attributed memoir. Not a single reliably attributed account of the soldier's experience. The only one that exists is Sitaram Subedar, which is maybe apocryphal. The actual text has never been found. And even if the text were found, it appears that the man who was taking down the dictation was automatically translating it into English, whereas the actual text the actual recounting of it was in Awadhi. So, these are the things that we really have to confront, when we try to deal with an Indian past, that, what meets us is this profound withdrawal, this incredible silence on the part of Indian protagonists. And in a way, that is what pushes one into fiction, because, in my book, In an Antique Land, I tried very hard to sort of recreate a historical presence, and that is not a novel, it's very much a non-fiction. It's a book of non-fiction. I tried to recreate a historical presence through tiny fragments. But in the case especially of, say, Indian soldiers, Indian indentured migrants, in the 19th century, we are really just looking at a vast blank, where it becomes almost impossible to explore that terrain. I'd also like to say here, though, it was at the risk of, harping on Tolstoy too much. But what is interesting about Tolstoy is that, Tolstoy is writing at a moment when the idea of the mass suddenly becomes very important, when ideas of randomness and probability also become very important. So for Tolstoy, what he's really doing is that he's trying to tell you that there is no narrative here, it's all just accidents, it's masses of people acting in a sort of blind way. But actually Tolstoy was wrong. That's what's really interesting. The Tsar had a carefully thought out plan. His entire battle plan was to draw Napoleon further and further into Russia, to trap him in the winter. So, actually it was a very well thought out a war plan. So, in that sense, Tolstoy was profoundly wrong,
Mukul?
The reason we return to Tolstoy, I think, is because, he's written the greatest historical novel it's possible to actually write. And Amitabh's right. There is a sense in which Tolstoy is illustrating a theory and precisely trying to demonstrate that the actions of the elite, self-confident though they are trivial and pathetic, because as they work their way down, to the mass, they become incoherent, and what then occurs is independent of policy or volition. I think, though, one of the interesting things about Amitabh mentioned the problems of actually trying to recreate the Indian past, for which there are no sources, simply because of the nature of power, the nature of literacy and illiteracy. It's something that, the subaltern school alerted us to, the changes in the directions of the subaltern school's historiography, the move from trying to recover the past of the poor and the subaltern to reading the texts of the elite, to decode them in a sense, to tell us something about that world. all of these bear witness to the difficulty of making this grand claim that you're going to recover the past of anything other than the people who rule the world. Paradoxically, the more we became conscious of the fact that we were writing a very narrow history of the state, the more we also became conscious of the fact that we write the history of the state because it's the available archive to write from. And Amitav is right that it is the sweep of imaginative fiction that often gives us a historical world which is plausible and which may well shape the historical agenda as Tolstoy did, but which I still think doesn't actually live or die by its claim to authenticity, but in a sense uses the particular historical event to illustrate themes that live on long after